So that's our double standard of the conquered mind. Our minds have been conquered, so we're not going to change our society. We're never gonna do anything that would revolutionize for better, even peacefully, our system. The way that we don't have a society that would be bitten by dogs and hosed by firefighters and imprisoned for civil disobedience and peaceful protest. Because we'll go downtown and let the cops, tell us where we can go, and we'll do the death cut, and then we'll go back and now we free Palestine.
Welcome to the 21st episode of the Fourth Podcast. My name is Ali Wazir.
My name is Ibrahim Ali.
And I'm Talha Muhammad.
And welcome back.
And we got a special guest, Ustadh.
Welcome back to the Fourth Podcast.
Yo, Assalamu alaikum. Jazakumullahu khairan for having me. It's an honor to be back.
At the time of that we're recording this podcast, we just finally saw U.S. troops leave Kabul airport, which is the last place they were stationed. So it seems like that war is totally over now after almost 20 years. 20 years minus a few days. Let's jump into imperialism at large, because we all live in America and this is all being done in our name. What do you guys think about that?
So, we were all just at the barbershop, right? Having a very interesting conversation with a couple of the brothers that were over there. And so one of the interesting things that he brought up is that that when we look at Afghanistan or any of these other countries where the United States is doing its imperialism, is that it's very much in character and in alignment with the goals of the United States. And we kind of need to look at what exactly are the core and fundamental things that America is built on. And one of the things that he was saying is that it's built on retaining power and gaining more, an accumulation of more wealth and more power by any means necessary, whether that be through imperialism or capitalism or any of these corrupt systems.
So you're telling me we're not trying to spread democracy?
Hey, man.
Well, why is that often used? Like, what's the point of saying that we're somewhere to spread democracy rather than just be honest about our goals in a foreign country?
Well, it's in alignment with historical propaganda, right? We're not spreading Christianity anymore, right? Mm-hmm. We're not establishing 1,000-year Reichs anymore. Mm-hmm. We're now spreading democracy because we have the most advanced way of life. We are the most socially accepting. We care the most about the world, and we're not doing it because we're Christians, because science, and we're not doing it because of nationalism, because everyone is welcome here. We're the great American welcoming melting pot. So democracy, that sounds like something people in impoverished parts of the world could really use to become as advanced and civilized as us. So them in their rags and covering themselves so much, oh man, we should spread democracy so that they can have pornography and sexual exploitation just like we do. Oh man, these people are so religious. We should spread democracy so that they can be secularized and it's just floating through life and just waiting to die, because there's nothing waiting for them in the end, just like all of us Americans. So yeah, it sounds great.
Just to piggyback off that,
piggyback.
Looking at American history, you see both in South America, in the Middle East, and also in Asia, this history of wanting to go ahead and spread quote-unquote democracy in order to free a country, which inevitably leads to more damage and more harm than we could ever foresee. And that's exactly what we saw in these last 2 decades with Afghanistan. We spent trillions of dollars, caused PTSD to hundreds, if not thousands of vets, separate families, rape women, children, lives lost. It's just a tragedy in and out, regardless of the lives that were lost, regardless of who was fighting one another. All around, it's a loss. And we spent trillions of dollars just to replace, as one interesting social commentator stated, just to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. So it was a thorough loss.
I mean, if you look into like the history of like exactly how it came about, well, I'm no expert in the history, obviously, but so correct me if I'm wrong, but like where the Taliban originally came from is very interesting, and it kind of stems from the same imperialist mindset of the United States, right? Because Afghanistan was basically was in the middle of another proxy war between the Soviet Union and the United States, because there was a socialist uprising in Afghanistan at the time, and the United States basically supported the Mujahideen, which was their group of rebel fighters, to overthrow the Soviet-backed government. Basically, it was like another classic topple the communist government or the socialist government at the time. So they basically the Taliban originated from the United States funding the Mujahideen group, right? So kind of didn't shoot ourselves in the foot, because basically is what it was intended to begin with. The purpose was fulfilled. The original purpose is still being fulfilled to this day. But that purpose being to give them an excuse to keep invading and to keep going back into Iraq, right? Or to Afghanistan in this specific case.
Well, see, here in the West, there tends to be like this idea that we have the best morals,
Mm-hmm.
right? And our morals are the right ones. And only with our morals can a nation succeed. And even the definition of success is usually a high GDP, not even looking at inequality or like upliftment from poverty or anything like that, but just, a lot of money, no matter where it is. And because of that, a country that's trying to do better for itself, right? Let's look at Afghanistan. The history of it is that it was under a monarchy that was supported by the British, and then eventually the British kind of left that area because they were broke from World War II, and they had a king. King became pretty unpopular, so there was a revolution over there that was socialist in nature, backed by the Soviet Union ultimately. But then because the Soviet Union started lending their support pretty heavily to the socialist government in Afghanistan, the U.S. decided that they needed to counter that, right, by funding the Mujahideen, which ultimately, I don't have much love for the Soviet-backed government either. But the point is that if a country is doing something, like if the people of a place are doing something in order to better themselves, even if you don't agree with the means, it doesn't give you a right to jump in and say, my morals are better and you're going to have to take this, right? What gives any country the right to do that? And to take it away from Afghanistan, but not move very far away, what gives the US or Western powers in general the right to say that about China? China is a country that has lifted more people out of poverty than any country in the history of the world. Their economy has developed so fast and pretty equally, and they now have the best public transportation in the entire world. They have put more high-speed rail down in the last 12 years than the rest of the world combined twice. Why do we get to say that their way of doing stuff is wrong just because we think that our morals are better?
Because their morals are more clearly defined, right? So it's very easy to be critical of it. The same for Islam in general. It's easy to be critical of the Sharia because we can point and say, they do this, they do this, they do this, cherry picking,
sure,
and misrepresenting and decontextualizing what is being looked at, but you can still look You can still look and see hudud, punishment. Oh, we don't like the way they punish people. We can look at China and say, oh, communism, their government, we don't like the way they run things. When you look at democracy, it's so vague, it's so general, that the things that we do in the name of democracy that naturally goes against, even in a moral subjectivist society, it naturally goes against our standards of morality. What's happened to Black people, prison industrial complex, promotion of white nationalism, wage gap, and then we go to, but all those things are only able to flourish in our country because of democracy. But even though those things are done in the name of democracy, we say we can also do the opposite of those things in the name of democracy too. So the parity allows for us to not be critical of our system, even though under the banner of that system, we've completely wronged ourselves and our citizens. Outside of that though, whenever you look at Sharia, when you look at communist countries, when you look at pretty much anywhere else in the world but us, we say, well, your issue is you're not giving the people the freedom to choose. You don't give them the freedom to choose. We do. So our civilian population is just chosen to accept anything that's been put in.
Right. Yeah. I mean, let's look at what the United States and other Western countries say about China to begin with. Right. One, the first thing that we heard was that they're taking Uyghurs and putting them in concentration camps. Right. Which is a very kind of obviously that word, that phrase, concentration camps, evokes a lot of feelings about, World War II and all that, and the Holocaust. Now, what China said was that actually we're just taking some people who have terrorist leanings and putting them in re-education camps. How is that any different than Guantanamo Bay? Okay. And then the next thing you hear is that, well, China is using these quote-unquote re-education camps to get free labor out of people, right? So a lot of Uyghur slave labor or Xinjiang slave labor is out there. But the United States has more people incarcerated per capita than any other country on earth, right? And I mean, if you look at, these things are measured in incarcerated people per 100,000 residents, right? Mm-hmm. So European countries would sit at around maybe 30 incarcerated people per 100,000 people. The US sits at 600. Okay. And if you look at black males, it shoots up to 4,000. 1 in 4 black people, or 1 in 3, I think, something like that, go to jail at some point in their lives.
Felons.
Right. Yeah, felons. And while they're in our entire prison industrial complex in this country allows for there to be essentially slave labor, because inmates at for-profit prisons can be made to work for way less than the minimum wage, literally pennies to the hour. So my point from mentioning all of this is that why are we allowed to say that while doing all of this, Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib and all the overseas military camps that we have, right, and also then the entire prison industrial complex within the United States, why are we allowed to say that this is not what America stands for while perpetuating it? But if another country does something like that, that is what they stand for, right? If there's a hudud going on in Afghanistan where they'll cut your hand off for stealing, why is that what that country stands for, but we don't stand for slave labor from prisons, despite having the highest percentage of it in the world?
Though you bring a really interesting point, and I think it lends itself more or less to the liberal paradox of America.
Okay.
Our subjective morals, as Ustadh mentioned, make it easy for us to critique others. In the sense that America, as you said, we have a mass incarceration rate. We have, even when it comes to moral subjectivism, 5-10 years ago, this is well known, 5-10 years ago, the topic of weed was taboo. Now it's completely on the table. Everyone's talking about it. The LGBTQ values and morals, taboo 10 years ago. In fact, it was a slur to call someone gay. It was something that, quote unquote, locker room talk would be utilized as a grenade of sorts.
Sure.
One another. And now you take a look at how liberalism allows for the inclusivity of all the values of a society as long as they align with the mainstream idea of what's right. But when you have other societies and other demographics that don't have that in line, it becomes very easy to say, oh, wait, we need to go over there and change their minds and make them better because we are a first world, a first world superpower. We, people look up to us, people admire us, and we therefore have the right somehow inherently to go over there and change people's minds, no matter where they are in the world, whether it be in the East or the West. And it's also important to note that even from an ethics standpoint, even from a philosophy point of view, you're never taught the philosophy or the ethics or the morals of Eastern philosophers, generally speaking, especially American colleges. You're never taught. You're taught Plato, Socrates, Kant, Rousseau, Mill, so on and so forth. You're never taught Eastern ideologies. You're never taught Asian ideologies or philosophies. Very often we're heavily influenced by a certain demographic of philosophers and intellectuals that lends itself to the growth of what we now see. So it's deep-rooted in American intellectual history.
So how do you think our approach to philosophy here lends itself to our empire?
So, for example, there's a great book by Giorgio Agamben. It's called The Sacred Man,
Okay.
in which he discusses how throughout American history and also throughout the Western history, especially Greco-Roman political thought, we pick a certain subsect of individuals and make them outlaws from a societal perspective. And you take a look at, for example, Nazi Germany, what they did with the Jews, for example. You take a look at, for example, in American history, recent American history, the African-American population and what they did, what the U.S. government specifically did towards them for over 200 years. It's really necessary to understand, first and foremost, that the civil rights movement specifically, as Malcolm X actually said, civil rights work within the legislation of America that is inherently flawed because it's, once again, based on subjective morality. You don't have any necessarily objective morals. You don't have any clear-cut laws. Laws are currently being amended, changed, adapted to. So it's necessary to know that, first and foremost, because we don't have a subjective morality, we're able to go ahead and basically remove ourselves from a set of morals in order to do what we want and then label it as democracy. So we're able to go ahead and plunder, rape, kill, pillage, no problem. But, we're doing it to better the lives of other people. And we're not fighting wars for moral reasons anymore. Everyone knows this. It's just frankly out there. Even your general layman will acknowledge that, hey, we're going over to the Middle East. The common knowledge is that it's usually for resources. And it's propagated by the media currently. It's propagated by blogs, CNN, Fox. It doesn't matter where it's coming from. The same narrative is being pushed to the American people. So
it reminds me actually of this one book that I read a long time ago now called Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. And in that book, a man talks to a gorilla for like weeks. It's a very interesting concept. But the gorilla tells the man at one point, like, look, imagine an alien came to Earth, okay? And this Earth is a little bit different than ours, okay? So jellyfish are really smart. So this guy, this alien goes to a jellyfish and says, well, tell me the history of your planet. So the jellyfish says, very smart. He says, our planet, kind of formed in the solar system from like debris around the sun, and then it coalesced and then it developed an atmosphere, started to rain, eventually making it a habitable place for life. Water came, right? And this led to evolution. First there were, like prokaryotes, then those kind of developed into eukaryotic cells and all that. And this started to lead to different forms of life and the different branches of like the animal kingdom and plants and all that kind of stuff, until finally we now exist, the jellyfish. It's the way it's presented is really bizarre because you're looking at it and it's funny, but you don't exactly know why, right? But the gorilla then explains to the guy, it's funny because the jellyfish seems to think that he's at the end of history, right? Like, this is the final stage. Now we exist, the jellyfish, right? And that's how I feel really Western morality presents itself. Like, okay, all this happened. You can go back and look at Socrates and Plato and Kant and all that. And now we exist, America, right? It's the exact same thing without thinking about where we came from history and how things will progress, how we'll look like in the future, right? Our descendants will not look upon us favorably and will not look upon this empire favorably. But at this point in time, a lot of people seem to think that this is it. This is the end of history. And we just need to take what we have now. It's perfect. Don't think about it, but it's perfect. And we need to spread this across the world.
I think people fail to realize that America's only been around for about 300 years, and like in the grand span of things, even in relation to other empires and other like governments and countries around the world, throughout history, actually, even the world, we're still fledgling. Like we're
at the stage of infancy per se.
Not really. We kind of speed ran the whole thing. Which is, I remember we were talking about this before, but like, it kind of brings up the topic of, are we failing or are we quote unquote succeeding? Because in my eyes, true success is not what Americans are going for, right? But is America a crumbling empire? Is a really good question that can be discussed. Is because, are we really like succeeding as a country because we have more homes, more empty homes than we have homeless people. We have more food wastage that can be used to feed all the hungry people in our country. We have, like we discussed earlier, we have more people in jails, a higher percentage of people in jails than any other country in the entire world. So like, are we really succeeding as a country? And is this success, quote unquote success, since we're talking about imperialism, right? Is success defined as making military contractors more rich, politicians more rich, and the ruling class more rich as a whole? And while the working class suffers, and is that really a viable path to success in the future for the American government?
You know, this concept of imperialism and how it inevitably is reintegrated in our global conquest, our global economic conquest, our social and our national, local slandering of certain ideologies, whether it be Islamophobia or religious thought, process contributions to theological discourse versus secularist conversation. And then how that inevitably, becomes things like war on terrorism, pretty much anti-government that is contrary to our quote unquote democratic way of life, really speaks to the idea that imperialism in our society today, even thinking that we're at the end of things, it's kind of like an end times complex where we really believe we are reaching the apex of the next generation of discovery scientifically, or we are at the end of times. The Antichrist is right around the corner. The trumpet is going to be blown at any given point in time. All of that speaks to the nature of imperialism, not just being a military pursuit, but most certainly a cerebral and intellectual one. And that is the American warfare. It's not just military. Look at how military failed, but look at how intellectual discourse on gender fluidity has succeeded. Look at how civil rights, as it was initiated, has failed. But look at how human rights has flourished and succeeded. It's
what do you mean by that, human rights?
Well, human rights is the liberal concept of being so ambiguous in what humans are entitled to that we can say, no, we need to be in Afghanistan to promote human rights, I see. But we have more empty homes than homeless people.
You know that you're really right. You hit it on the nail with that liberal paradox, right? Like, okay, we need to be in Afghanistan or anywhere else because women don't have the right to an education, right? But it's like, okay, women over here have the right to an education, but they make 70 cents to a man's dollar, what are you going to do about that? Why don't you take care of that first, right? But it's such a liberal approach to human rights that you only that what you do is perfect. First of all, okay, we give women the right to vote over here. So Saudi Arabia must give women the vote, the right to vote. But how about you see what women in this country struggle with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like women get raped here at a much higher rate than in Saudi Arabia.
Sexual assault every 8 seconds.
That's crazy,
right? Nothing like that in Saudi for sure. But with that liberal mindset, combined with this end of time thing that we've reached.
We're the jellyfish.
We are the jellyfish.
Now we have jellyfish. Yes.
That's it. We've peaked.
And Allah, has informed us about these things that we're seeing in ways that sometimes we don't reflect on the Quran enough to really understand. Riba, for example. Riba being something that we as Muslims know, debt, credit-based debt, usury, adding value to things that should not have that value, and thereby indebting people, making them owe more than what they're due. We know that it's such a big deal in Islam. Credit cards, mortgages, taking out leases with APR and these interest rates and all this stuff. But that's what our Western imperialism is. It's indebting societies while not empowering and uplifting civilian life for the people who are supposed to benefit from taking the resources from other nations. So yes, we pillage and plumage the wood, the timber, and the natural resources in the Amazon. We've done that. But how has that benefited our society? Oh, we have more houses than people can live in. Okay, fantastic. All right, we've gone to the Middle East and seized the oil fields and the opium fields and the marijuana fields of Afghanistan, Iraq, and Iran, and we conquered the tyranny and replaced one despot with another from our people. And we've done that, and we have those resources, but how has that helped with over-policing and, three black people being shot and killed by law enforcement every single day in the United States? Oh, it hasn't. So while indebting other societies, we've indebted our own civilians and not benefited our civilians from our global imperialism. What the heck type of imposter syndrome is that? What are we doing? It's crazy. And while psychologically there's some discussion to be said about the Dunning-Kruger effect, if you're familiar with it. The Dunning-Kruger effect is essentially where people, it's what makes horoscopes work, right? It's even though there's no science to astrology, right? If I put enough characteristics in one place, then you're like, ooh, me. It's the same thing we've done with our moral subjectivity, with our social media culture, with our concept of institutional disconfirmation, where we use sociology to say correlation doesn't dictate causation, but then we correlate things to say one causes the other. Sharia law existing in Afghanistan is the reason why women don't have a right to education. But sexual exploitation of women in our society is not the reason why women make less money than men.
And it's not the result of like capitalism or neoliberalism in this country either, right?
Don't tell me those things. They make me uncomfortable. But let's talk about what's wrong with everywhere else.
It's so much
cerebral imperialism. We've already conquered the minds of our people to not think critically about anything except what we tell them to be critical of.
It's such a good point that you bring up, because there's so much like cognitive dissonance in the way that people, because I remember you brought up a really good point, and I was like looking into this the other day, where a lot of like feminists, like liberal feminists, these guys, they were
these guys.
Brother,
please use your pronouns.
Yeah, but these guys, I said it again. These people, they impose their view of what they think is empowerment of women on Afghani women. They're like, oh, these guys are forced to cover up, like they're forced to cover their bodies. Meanwhile, they don't realize that they're completely neglecting the fact that they don't know what these Afghani women want. Maybe they don't want to be exploited for their bodies. Maybe they don't want to be sexually harassed. Maybe they don't want to have all these things. And this like attitude, this cognitive dissonance, it carries over to all facets of like the American population, which is, to be fair, to be honest, is the dumbest population of any country that we have in the United States. They are so dumb. Like we think that we're the best country in the world. We think that politics actually matter. We think so many different things. Yet we think that the America is the best country in the world. Yet we have so many glaring problems that we've been conditioned to not, like you said, imperialism of the mind. We've been conditioned to thinking that these things are not a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's interesting.
So that's why we're not going to try to change our society. We're going to try to change other societies. It's out of sight. It's out of mind.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take
Because our
It's-
society is perfect.
It's so easy to recognize their problems, right? It brings me back to this. Okay, up until 2018, women were not allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia. It wasn't technically a law, but like a woman couldn't go and get a driver's license. That was like the root of it. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
like she couldn't walk into a DMV or DMV equivalent over there and get a driver's license, which
Sure.
essentially banned them from driving. And like in any conversation about Saudi Arabia here, that would come up, right? Oh, women can't even drive over there. Look at how they treat their women. Women can't drive over there. Okay. I lived in Saudi Arabia actually from 2009 to 2018. And anecdotally, at least, I can tell you, every single Saudi woman I talked to was like, I'm fine not driving. Have you seen the way people drive over here? I'm good not doing that. I have a driver, you know, like they have drivers. I literally keep a guy, you know, who came from Bangladesh and lives in my courtyard. And,
Yeah.
and
You like that, bro?
right? And when I say I want to go to the grocery store, he drives me over there, keeps the car running while I'm inside so that it doesn't get hot in this 125-degree heat out here. And then I get back in, I'm on my phone, and he drives me back home. I'm chilling, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And even after, in 2018, finally, women were allowed to start getting licenses. I mean,
It wasn't a rush to the
I went back-
DMV equivalent
oh.
of women going to, finally, I can drive.
Nobody cared,
No
right?
one cared.
Like,
We cared.
oh yeah,
Look at how
you
long it
cared.
took them to do.
And you know, like here's the thing too, right? Like it was it becomes so easy to dupe the American public then, because they were like, what? Women are finally allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia? Who did this? Mohammed ibn Salman? That's the real king over there. Meanwhile, this guy is using American military and American funding to kill millions of women in Yemen. Like, who cares about them, right?
Exactly.
Or give them cholera, or deprive them of food,
yeah.
or make man-made droughts, you know, man-made famine. Just use the American Navy to block all the ports of Yemen so that food can't come in, aid can't come in. It's ridiculous, you know, and
Well, that's our double standard of the conquered mind. Our minds have been conquered, so we're not going to change our society. We're never gonna do anything that would revolutionize for better, even peacefully, our system. The way that we don't have a society that would be bitten by dogs and hosed by firefighters and imprisoned for civil disobedience and peaceful protest. Because we'll go downtown and let the cops, you know, tell us where we can go, and we'll
Them after.
do the debka, and then we'll go back and now we free Palestine. And like I said, Allah in the Quran has told us about the ramifications of people who don't think. They're like cattle. They're actually worse. They're like an an'am. Actually, no, they're even more astray. So yeah, we have become sheeple. Unfortunately, even more astray because we've sacrificed our aql. You know, whenever you tie this dunya conquesting, you know, this conquer the dunya, because all right, is imperialism, to go back to the initial quote, is it winning? Yeah, it is, because the imperialists at the top of the proverbial pyramid, the Illuminati or whoever, they're making mad bank, yes, and their lifestyles are facilitating their sex trade, pedophilia, are facilitating their gross, multi-million dollar yachts, and them preparing to go to space. And yes, they're winning. Yeah, they're big chilling on their massive yachts in the Pacific Ocean, and flying up to lower atmosphere and coming back down.
It's not even space.
They're not even. They haven't even made it to space, but God knows they're gonna try. And Walt Disney is frozen somewhere, and Allah knows best. So we are. Is it winning? Well, yeah, it is, because the elite 0.01% that's making a ton of money and trickling it down to the 1% and trickling that down to the 5%, to the 10% that runs our media, that runs our concept of popular culture and movies and music and all this stuff. Yeah, it is winning. But the minds are conquered. So as a result of it, we're losing our concept of being woke, our concept of being involved, our concept of activism, our concept of knowledge has been completely tainted. So look at the stocks of the akhirah comparatively. When Allah tells us in the Quran twice, in Surah Sajdah, chapter 32, verse number 14, and in Surah Al-An'am, chapter 7, verse 179, that most people will go to hell. Like, when you look at the world that we're in, you see firsthand why that's true. Those who have been subjected to that wave of imperialism and had their mind conquered by something so fragile, that we're looking at the house of the spider. You said a crumbling empire. Yeah, you're dang right, because boy, does this spider web look so intricate. But a simple breeze would be enough to blow this whole thing up, and we're only a breeze away, right? At this point. And for the conquered minds, when our house of the spider falls apart, and that next wave, because these types of things happen historically, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. When we find ourselves there and our Wi-Fi no longer works and our podcast careers are no longer this and our YouTube and all that stuff finally goes away in the next way, what did you have? What did you keep? If you didn't find God in this time, and if you did not find religion in this time, and you did not find peace in this time, but you found yourself tweeting and you found yourself, woke but sleep, like, where did we find ourselves? Like cattle, even more astray. So, I mean, it's winning. We're just winning at losing.
Where they're really winning, though, and I agree with everything you said, but the place that they're really winning is in colonizing the minds of, like, really the world, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, and especially, like, Muslims, all right? You can take everything and, like, point it out the way we did, all right? This is where they're being hypocritical, and they say this about this place, but it applies to them, and their morality is loose, and they don't actually have any morals that they go by, and they just kind of win these rhetorical wars by just being vague about it. Oh, we do something that they also do? Well, that's not what we stand for, but it is what they stand for. But they win when they dupe Muslims into thinking that whatever they have to offer is better than what Allah has given us. Right? So we can point out the faults of liberalism and capitalism all day, but if we don't turn back to what's actually been given to us already, then they do continue to win, right? Which goes back to, like, the colonized mentality of Muslims. The colonization of most of our countries ended, at least, 50, 60, 70 years ago, but our minds remain very, very colonized.
We shift a little bit to that end time type of talk where, I mean, look, not to be, just there and on a soapbox.
Not to be a doomer.
I don't want to doomsday, you know what I'm saying? Even though I do want I might eat a little underground kit at this rate, with lots of ramen noodles and bottled water. But, so on one hand, with this conquered mindset, yeah, we're priming the minds for something like the Dajjal to come, right? Where atheists say that we believe in science because we can see science and it can be provable. When you have something come that does something that's completely unexplainable by your science, then yeah, you would take that thing as God in a heartbeat, right? But then, and it's just a reflection. You guys can run with it or whatever you think is best. But one of the key features of the Mahdi is that the Mahdi will establish justice in just 7 years. Mm-hmm. When the Mahdi comes, just 7 years. Just 7 years.
That's not even 2 presidential terms.
That's not. That's really, really crazy to think about, because it's like Islam is a solution that can undo centuries of harm
Mm.
in a very short amount of time. When you think about what the Prophet ﷺ did in just 23 years, what Abu Bakr did in just 2 years after that, and then Umar, and then Uthman, and then Ali. How much time is that historically? Is it even 70 years? But what did that give birth to? An age of enlightenment, 1,000-year world power? Like, what the heck? In just a short amount of time from these people that you didn't even think of, you didn't even hear anything about. Like, Mahdi comes with Islam, pure Islam, is able to establish justice in a world that we see very clearly absolutely unjust, establish justice in just 7 years. SubhanAllah.
You know, and the crazy thing too is that the Mahdi will come first to defeat Dajjal, right? And Dajjal is known that all of his people will be people of interest, of riba, right? And so we can understand that, you know, a lot of people, they say, well, how do you live in an interest-free world? We can't conceptualize a modern economy without interest, and you just kind of need to go with it, all this, all that. And in fact, interest is even what imperialism hinges on, right? A lot of times what happens is that a country that refuses to go by the global economy, like Afghanistan back in the 90s, they're invaded and then they're given a lot of loans from, you know, because they're poor, third world, you don't really have resources. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, you know, the IMF, and we're going to give you a loan and you can just pay that back in however long you want with this much % interest, right? So interest like keeps being forced down people's throats in like other parts of the world, right? And people here also say, well, you know, how can you conceptualize a world that really doesn't have interest, you know, doesn't work in the modern economy? Well, we know that the Mahdi will fix all that in 7 years. That's all it'll take. Okay, we'll go from majority people dependent on interest, which is what the Dajjal's people are going to be, to the Mahdi fixing all that in 7 years. You just have to put faith in what Allah tells you.
That's right.
He didn't tell you not to do interest because it's a funny joke. It's a practical joke. Oh, let's see how people can do that when it's impossible. No, it's very possible.
Right.
And we just need to put faith in that, right? Have faith in the system that's given to us, especially in the face of that the other systems just don't work.
Right. You know, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that you brought up an interesting point in terms of like when countries try to use alternative forms of currency or alternative forms of alternative monetary systems. The United States comes in and coups them. Great example, Algeria.
Libya?
Libya.
Yeah.
Not Algeria, Libya. When Gaddafi, one of the main reasons why Obama came in and yeeted Gaddafi was because his plan was to unite all the countries in Africa and for them to start using monetary system. It wasn't based on gold. It was based on the natural resources, backed by the natural resources of the African continent, which we all know is extremely dense in natural resources like gold, oil, diamonds, rare minerals, lithium, all these different types of things. The United States isn't like that because our entire country, like I remember we watched that one documentary a while ago. What was it called? Zeitgeist. Yeah, where it's an excellent documentary if anyone wants to watch it. But it kind of broke down how our entire economic system is based on interest. And I hate to use this reference because it aged very poorly. Thank you, Kevin Spacey. But our entire country is literally a house of cards. And like you said, a light breeze will just knock it over.
Yeah. To that point, when it comes to like this whole idea of imperialism and everything from Afghanistan to liberal agendas to what we see within our own society to what we see happening on a global scale, how the prophets of Allah prophesied about all of this, and how Muslims prefer everything other than this. It's crazy to think that the initial conquest was to make sure that Muslims devalued their religion first. And that was not something that was caused by non-Muslims. That was something that was actually done by ourselves when we thought that everything except our deen, except our way of life was better. And we developed an inferiority complex towards our faith and how we actualize it. Before we came here and we did this, we're sitting in a barber shop. Random. I'm walking towards a cafe. A guy sees how I'm dressed. He's like, "Are you a Muslim?" He asked me if I would come back and impart some wisdom sometime. We finish up our meeting. We walk back there. We sit there for like an hour talking to him about Islam, about Christianity. He wanted to hear what we as Muslims, based on how we look, how we're carrying ourselves, what we think about Afghanistan. Everything we're saying to him, he completely agrees with. He says he's 50 years old. Guy's built like a Mack truck. May Allah guide him and preserve him. And everything that we're sitting there saying to him, he agrees with. The guy whose hair he's cutting in the chair agrees with. Another guy comes in, begins getting his hair cut. He agrees with it. Another guy sitting there, you may not have seen it, but he's not in agreement with everything we say. White guy comes in, thick country accent, little camo on his hat. He's sitting there and he's agreeing with all of it. Because when we just take our deen and we just put it in front of people, it is very, very hard to disagree with it. But whenever we have the truth and we think that it's not enough, then yeah, our sisters will prefer to be feminist. Yeah, our back home aunties and uncles will think that white is right. Yeah, we will not really care about dawah. We won't spread our religion. We won't put it in a position for people to accept it because we've already accepted the dawah of Western imperialization. We've already been conquered intellectually and spiritually.
That really brings up a great point. Especially on social media, on Instagram specifically, New York Times, they have an opinions page. And as soon as this whole situation in Afghanistan broke down, Brett Stevens, he's a writer for New York Times, he said, there are roughly 18 million women and girls in Afghanistan. They will now be subject to laws from the 7th century, and he referencing Sharia law. And what I found interesting and intriguing was how many Muslims reposted this on their story. And I was and Ibrahim, also going back to the point that you mentioned regarding the quote-unquote freedom of women and the quote-unquote problem with the hijab in Afghanistan, and how people would take images of women in Afghanistan in the 1970s wearing short skirts and no hijab, and juxtaposing them with women wearing the niqab or the hijab as it should be worn, and somehow finding a problem with it and reposting it. Number one, it's interesting because you have a man who probably is not even anywhere knowledgeable in regards to Sharia, commenting on it and conflating it with what the current government of Afghanistan is doing, which Allahu Alam if they're even implementing Sharia properly in the first place. And so we have, as you mentioned, sisters that are falling into feminism, liberalism, so on and so forth, reposting these things, Allahu Alam if Allah is pleased with in the first place, what their thumbs are doing. But it's just intriguing because it goes to show you that we stop thinking and we become sheeple and we just follow with whatever we see, whatever comes on our feeds, whatever we see on television, the newspaper, and we stop being critical, as you mentioned. And also, as Tolha mentioned, we have this quote unquote end of the line complex where I guess living in the West, Muslims have first and foremost the colonized mentality, an inferior complex, and also the end of the line complex, where it's all mashed into one brain and toss on the influences that we're getting from social media and so on and so forth. And that allows for us to sit back and be like, oh, well, we don't necessarily need the deen to tell us our morals and values. We have liberalism. We have feminism. And it's just very intriguing, very sad at the same time.
Yeah, we don't need the deen to tell us our morals and values. We have ideologies that don't have morals and values to tell us what our morals and values should be, right?
What's interesting, man? Sorry to cut you off.
No.
When Obama was president and he went over to East Africa and attempted to propagate LGBTQ values to their presidents and to their prime ministers, they were very harsh and very upfront in saying, this is not an issue for us right now. LGBTQ plus, as it stands in America from 2012 to whenever Obama's presidency ended, 2016, I believe, is not an issue for us. And it's very sad that Muslims can't do the same with their religion. We can't say, oh, wait a second, hijab is in the Quran, hijab is a part of our faith, and thus, whether or not we agree with the current government as it stands in Afghanistan, it is part of our religion, and we should stand up for it.
And even, whenever you say, the U.S. going abroad and promoting LGBT plus issues and all that. It's like, okay, but transgender people inside the United States have a much higher suicide rate than like the normal population or like the average population
They're happy.
by like many fold. No, and here's the thing, right? Like, because you won't even give transgender people in the United States like access to good mental health services that they can use to improve their situation. Like, why are you somewhere else telling people how to treat their LGBT populations when your own LGBT populations are suffering in your own country, right? Like, again, it goes back to just like not practicing what you preach whatsoever, which seems to be a real keystone of empire.
And that is the great feature of any great empire, is that you conquer the minds of your civilians, so that anything you put in front of them, they take it and they'll accept it. Stalin, Hitler, in hindsight, it's easy to be critical from our lens, but don't you know that there was an entire nation of people that bought into that vision? What did it take for them to accept that? And even like the Roman Empire, and the promotion of pedophilia, which I don't know how historically we always managed to overlook that. Sex slaves, and the way that they approached conquest and the wretched public punishment that they did. Well, hey, at least they have these great philosophers, am I right? Well, they use their political philosophies as a means of making the people think that this level of intellectualism, this level of skepticism, this level of stoicism, this level of ataraxia, not ataraxia, but that we are promoting and have amongst ourselves. This is what has made us the elites of the elite, and this is why we're able to go from this part of the world to the next, and our empire stretches as far as the sun reaches, and that type of nonsense. We as Muslims have accepted the one thing that Allah has told us not to do, and it's shirk. We've made co-equals with Allah. We don't do it with Jesus Christ, sure. We don't do it with Vishnu and, Krishna. We don't do it with any of those. But we've done it with legislation in the hearts of what we allow to take root in our own belief system. And we know that historically the Mu'tazila was an issue. Kalam became a part of the discussion at one point in time. We know that the Khawarij, all of these ideological issues that happened throughout our history divided the Muslims and created problems that otherwise we would not have simply had. We're subjected to the same things today. We have the Murji'a of our age. We have the Khawarij of our age. We have the Mu'tazila of our age. We have these sects in our age. It's just all is coming from different angles. Except, at least before, you can make an argument that these people, they just believed wrong. Today, we have people that just believe in Allah and everything else. There's no Iman. It's just crazy to think about.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Fourth Podcast, brought to you by Morisco. If you haven't already, go ahead and give us a follow on Instagram and Twitter, and have a great rest of your day.